Alright, let's dive in. Tonight, we're heading into the rowdy, smoky, and let's be honest, slightly sticky world of the medieval tavern. This place was the unsung heart of every town, the unofficial news centre, and pretty much the only place where a knight, a farmer, and a bard could all get equally drunk, and you guessed it, equally robbed. It wasn't just a bar. It was a place where danger, laughter, and disease all mingled freely under one very flammable thatched roof. So, before we get too comfortable, if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining our little journeys from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into this together. Picture this. You've trudged through a muddy street that smells like a potent blend of horse, smoke, and some kind of questionable soup. It's raining, of course, or it just finished. So everything is slick, including the only pair of shoes you own. You're tired, you're hungry, and you've nearly been run over by a cart full of turnips. Twice. You need a drink. So, how do you even find a tavern in a medieval town? There are no glowing neon signs, no Yelp reviews, and certainly no GPS. What you do have are your ears. You just follow the noise. Somewhere past the clang of the blacksmith's forge and the fishmonger yelling about his fresh river eels, you'll hear it. A chorus of shouting, roaring laughter, and someone aggressively singing a song about a goose. And there it is. A crooked wooden building leaning just slightly, as if the architecture itself has had one too many. Hanging above the door is a wooden sign, barely legible, with a crude painting of... Is that a barrel? Or a bear? Or maybe a bear-barrel hybrid? Either way, this is it. Welcome to the tavern. The front step is slick with spilled ale, and as you push open the heavy iron-hinged door, it lets out a creak so long and dramatic, it could probably qualify as its own form of entertainment. Instantly, a wave of warm air and the rich perfume of smoke, wet wool, stale beer, and mystery meat hits you in the face like a drunken handshake. You've made it. Inside, the ceiling is low enough to make tall men duck, and drunk men constantly bump their heads. The floor is dirt, and I don't mean that metaphorically. It is literally dirt, though someone has scattered some straw around in a half-hearted attempt to pretend it's cleaner. It isn't. There are no private booths, no waiters with menus, and absolutely no such thing as a quiet conversation. This is a medieval tavern, and it only comes in two settings, rowdy and closed due to fire. You spot an open seat at a lopsided bench near the hearth, but it's wet with... You know what? Don't ask. Someone nearby is having a very loud argument about a stolen chicken. Another person is passed out with a ladle still clutched in his hand. A one-eyed dog is gnawing on a bone under a table like he pays rent there. And this, my friend, is just the entrance. You've only just arrived, and already it smells like a night to remember. Or maybe one you'd rather forget. As that heavy tavern door slams shut behind you, the darkness kind of wraps around your senses like a damp wool blanket. It's warm, uncomfortable, and feels slightly suspicious. Your eyes adjust slowly. Candlelight flickers against soot-stained walls, casting these dancing shadows that make even the chairs look like they might be looking for a fight. The hearth is blazing in the far corner, doing double duty as both the heating system and a massive open flame hazard. Smoke drifts lazily through the air, not quite managing to escape through a chimney that might just be stuffed with a dead crow. But what hits you hardest isn't the noise or the heat, it's the smell. A medieval tavern's scent is less of an aromatic experience and more of an emotional trauma. The top notes are ale-warm, sour, and splashed liberally across every single surface. Beneath that, you've got sweat. Years of it. Human sweat, horse sweat, maybe even the sweat of something mythical. Add a hint of mouldy bread, wet straw, and just a whisper of boiled onions, and you have a blend that no perfumer has ever dared to bottle. The tables are carved with generations of initials, crude drawings, and knife scars from past arguments. They wobble with a kind of stubborn pride. The benches creak under the weight of muddy boots, thick cloaks, and a whole lot of questionable decisions. The floor, as promised, is dirt, but it's layered with straw that's meant to soak up spills, spit, and the occasional unconscious customer. You step carefully. One wrong move and your foot sinks into something with a texture that is best left undescribed. The crowd is a living, breathing organism. Loud laughter erupts from one corner, while two men argue about the price of a pig in another. A woman slams her mug down hard enough to spill half her drink, and nobody even flinches. A man at the next table is just staring at you with the dazed look of someone who's either thinking very deeply or has completely forgotten how chairs work. Someone nearby sneezes, and the entire left side of the room collectively leans away. And still, despite this overwhelming assault on your modern sensibilities, there's something weirdly welcoming here. The tavern is alive, it's rough, it's raw, and it's completely unfiltered, the medieval version of a community hub, just minus the hygiene and with about 400% more shouting. You find your seat. It's a bit damp, it's probably cursed, but for now, it's yours. At first glance, the tavern's layout looks like someone arranged the furniture during an earthquake and then just decided to leave it that way. There's no blueprint, no designated bar area, no cozy booths in the back. It's just a sprawling, uneven mess of tables, benches, barrels, and the occasional wooden crate being passed off as a seat. Everything is either too close together or too far apart, depending entirely on how drunk you are. The hearth is the only real centerpiece. It's a big, open fire roaring against one wall, doing its absolute best to provide warmth, light, and a healthy dose of indoor smoke inhalation. People crowd around it for comfort, like moths with mugs. The ones with the best seats are hogging all the warmth. For everyone else, well, that's what the ale is for. The bar, if you can even call it that, is usually just a thick wooden plank resting across two barrels, sagging under the weight of jugs, mugs, and elbows. Behind it stands the tavern keeper, a master multitasker, juggling pouring drinks, yelling orders, and giving that one guy in the corner the death stare that says, "You still haven't paid for last Tuesday." There are no menus. You ask what's available and just brace yourself for the answer. It's usually ale or shut up and wait. A narrow staircase, possibly original and definitely splintery, leads to the upstairs rooms. If you squint, you can see a boot hanging from one of the railing posts. No one is entirely sure if it's decorative or a warning. Some taverns have a back room. It might be for storage. It might be for illegal gambling. Or it might be where the last person who insulted the barmaid was taken, never to be seen again. It's probably best not to ask. The walls are stained with candle soot. The windows are covered with greasy cloth or stretched animal hide, and every single surface has been thoroughly polished by the elbows, boots, and spilled drinks of generations past, and maybe a chicken. Somehow, despite the chaos, or maybe because of it, it all works. Everyone knows where to go, how to sit, when to shout, and when to duck. It's not organized, but it is alive. Every medieval tavern has a ruler, and it's not the local lord or the tax collector, it's the tavern keeper. They may not wear a crown, but don't be fooled for a second, this person runs the show. They are equal parts chef, server, accountant, babysitter, and the executioner of barroom justice. The tavern keeper is a one-person institution, and they take absolutely no nonsense. If it's a man, he's likely built like a barrel with arms grizzled, grumpy, and seemingly carved from cured meat, and a lifetime of bad decisions. If it's a woman, and it often was, she's sharper than a blacksmith's file and can silence an entire room with a single look. Either way, they've seen everything, heard worse, and have probably cleaned blood out of the straw before breakfast. They greet the regulars with a nod, strangers with suspicion, and troublemakers with a tankard to the side of the head. Behind the bar, they're keeping a mental tab on who's paid, who owes, and who's had 3 too many. And they do it all without writing a single thing down, because while medieval literacy might have been rare, A tavern keeper's memory is terrifyingly accurate. The tavern keeper sets the tone. If they're in a good mood, the place hums with energy. If they're in a bad mood, you'd better drink fast and keep your jokes to yourself. They are the referee in every argument, the judge in every cheating scandal, and the first person to grab a club when a fight breaks out. You do not mess with the tavern keeper. They also know everything. Who's in debt? Who's having an affair? Who just rode into town under a false name? If you need information, you bribe the barkeep. If you need protection, you sit near them. If you need a favor, you'd better hope you didn't break a mug last week. Some have a helper, a son, a daughter, a spouse, or maybe an orphan they sort of adopted, and now make carry barrels twice their own weight. These assistants run drinks, mop the floors, and try their best not to spill anything or get stepped on by drunks. So, while the tavern might feel like pure chaos to you, it's actually a very delicate ecosystem. And right in the center, commanding it all like a storm god in an apron, stands the one person keeping the ale flowing and the roof from collapsing into a full-blown riot, the tavern keeper. So you finally settle onto that creaky bench, dodging elbows and spilled stew. Your throat's dry, your boots are still damp, and it's time for the main event, the drink. But don't go expecting a wine list or a polished mug. This is a medieval tavern. Your choices are limited, lukewarm, and possibly life-threatening. Let's start with the classic, ale. It's unfiltered, unpasteurized, and usually brewed right in the back room where the dog sleeps. It's thick, cloudy, and often comes with floaties bits of grain, yeast, or maybe a chunk of the previous customer's mustache. It's not cold because there's no such thing as ice, and you do not ask how long it's been sitting in that barrel. You just drink it and hope for the best. Next up, you might find mead, or honey wine. Sounds fancy, right? In reality, it's sweet, incredibly strong, and occasionally explosive. If the tavern keeper brewed it themselves, it might be delicious, or it might taste like pure regret and bee venom. It's usually served to nobles, wedding guests, or that one bard who insists on being paid in either gold or mead. Then there's cider. It's made from apples that were either freshly picked or just dropped on the ground 3 weeks ago. It's sharp, tangy, and served in cracked mugs that may very well double as soup bowls by morning. It's the drink of choice in orchard-rich regions, or for those who just want something alcoholic enough to forget the smell of the man sitting next to them. Wine? Technically, yes, it exists. But unless you're in southern Europe, or the local nobility is in town, it's likely watered down, soured, and served with a heavy side of sarcasm. Good wine is reserved for lords, bishops, and the merchant who just sold 12 crates of salt. And water. That's a bold choice, my friend. A very bold choice. Because half the time, it's teeming with invisible death. Boiling it costs fuel, and clean wells are a rarity. That's the real reason why even children drank ale. It wasn't about getting a buzz. It was about not dying of dysentery before you turned 8. No one's measuring shots or crafting cocktails here. You drink from mugs made of wood, clay, or tin. Some of them might still have last night's stew crusted in the bottom. You raise your mug, give it a suspicious sniff, and take a sip. It's warm, it's bitter, and somehow, it's perfect. Because in a medieval tavern, if it's wet and it won't kill you immediately, it's a fine vintage. So, you've survived the drink. Barely. Now your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since sunrise, and your last meal was mostly barley and sadness. It's time to eat. But hey, don't get too excited. There's no menu, no waiter, and absolutely no one asking if you have any dietary restrictions. You don't order food in a medieval tavern. You ask what's left, and then you hope it's hot and only vaguely mysterious. The undisputed star of the tavern table is usually pottage. This is a thick, hearty stew made from whatever grains, vegetables, and questionable proteins were just lying around that day. It's been cooking in the same pot since Monday, and it's now Thursday. New ingredients are just added daily. Nothing is ever removed. It's less of a meal and more of a culinary time capsule. If there's meat involved, congratulations. It's probably rabbit, pigeon, or the unlucky chicken who wandered a little too close to the fire. If it's game meat, it might be delicious, or it might be aged well past the point of reason and seasoned with pure desperation. Your bowl is made of wood or clay. Your spoon is either your own or your fingers. Most people carried their own knife, so eating was very much a BYO cutlery affair. And don't even think about asking for napkins. You've got the sleeve of your tunic or a shared rag that has seen things it will never, ever forget. Bread is also on offer. It's tough, dark, and heavy enough that it could be used as a weapon more effectively than as a food source. If it's soft, it was baked today. If it's hard enough to break a tooth, it was baked last week. Either way, it pairs surprisingly well with cheese that smells like an old boot and has started to develop its own distinct personality. Sometimes you'll find salted fish, sometimes pickled eggs. Occasionally, a tavern might offer a special, which is just a fancier way of saying, we had way too much of this one thing lying around. Flavor is optional. Texture is unpredictable. Still, in the flickering firelight, with all the noise around you and the warmth of the food in your hands, it's not bad, it's filling, it's hot. And if you don't think too hard about what exactly is floating in your bowl, it might even be comforting. You're not here for fine dining. You're here to eat like a survivor. Once you've found your seat, ideally one that doesn't have a knife stuck in it, you start to notice the real entertainment, the people. A medieval tavern is basically the original social media feed. It's loud, chaotic, half-true, and fully committed to oversharing. To your left, there's a red-faced farmer who is already deep into his fourth ale, retelling the exact same story about his cow giving birth sideways. He slaps your shoulder mid-sentence like you're a lifelong friend, or maybe a good replacement for the pig he usually drinks with. At the far end of the room, a hooded stranger sits alone in the shadows, nursing a single drink very, very slowly. He could be a runaway monk, a bandit on the run, or maybe just someone who's really, really bad at making eye contact. Either way, you're probably not going to make small talk with him unless you want to disappear behind the stables later. Near the hearth, a soldier in battered armor is regaling a small group with his tales of battle. His story involves dragons, Frenchmen, and a talking sword. It is definitely 100% false, but no one cares. His tankard is full, and his audience is laughing, so the story continues. There's a merchant, loud and sweaty, shouting out prices for grain that absolutely no one asked for. He keeps pulling gold coins from his pouch like a man who is practically begging to be robbed by midnight. A pair of locals are playing dice on a warped table, their expressions incredibly intense. One of them is clearly cheating. The other one knows he's cheating and is just letting it happen, probably saving the fight for when his ale runs out. A bard is strumming away in the corner, his voice cracking on the high notes of a love song that sounds suspiciously like one he just made up on the spot. No one minds. He's wearing pants and he's mostly in tune, which already makes him better than last night's guy. Women wander through the crowd. Some are tavern staff, others are working their own kind of business. They're sharp-eyed, confident, and absolutely not to be trifled with. They'll flirt, laugh, or knock your teeth in, depending entirely on your tone. Children occasionally dart between legs, swiping leftover bread or a dropped coin. No one stops them. It's just part of the tavern's rhythm. And everyone is watching, drinking, plotting, and collectively pretending not to notice the man who is currently slumped unconscious under the table. This tavern isn't just a place to eat and drink. It's a living, breathing performance. And tonight, you're part of the cast. Forget lutes and ballads for a moment. The real soundtrack of a medieval tavern isn't a song. It's a symphony of pure chaos. It begins with the clink of mugs, dozens of them, slamming against wooden tables in celebration, in negotiation, or just in a drunken misfire. Some of them clang cheerfully, others shatter completely. Both sounds are met with enthusiastic cheers. Then comes the laughter. Big, loud, belly laughter that sounds like it just escaped from a wild boar. Most of it makes absolutely no sense. A farmer is chuckling at his own joke about hay. A knight is giggling at the word pottage. A monk is wheezing uncontrollably every time someone says the word duck. You learn pretty quickly not to ask. Voices layer over one another, each one louder than the last, all fighting for dominance like roosters in a coop. There's arguing, there's storytelling, there's shouting about taxes, and there's at least one person misquoting scripture to try and win a bet. The bartender yells orders while swatting at flies. A barmaid shouts at a man who tried to grab her, and someone just keeps repeating, "Another round," like it's a battle cry. And in the corner, there's the bard, with his half-tuned lute and 3 missing strings. He's playing the same 4 chords on a loop, occasionally bursting into verses about lost love, found chickens, or noblemen who wore their pants backward. No one is really listening, unless he starts singing about someone who is actually in the room, at which point things get very entertaining, or very dangerous, very quickly. Someone spills something. Someone burps loud enough to make the rafters tremble. Someone else falls off a bench and just keeps talking from the floor, like it was an intentional move. In the background, dogs are barking. A goat bleats. Why is there a goat? Don't ask. Just accept the goat. And chairs scrape across the dirt floor like thunderclaps in a wooden cavern. It's not peaceful, but it's oddly rhythmic. Occasionally, for no reason at all, the room goes completely quiet. It's a sudden, jarring lull that lasts for exactly 3 seconds. Then, someone farts heroically, and the music starts right back up again. This isn't background noise. This is the tavern's heartbeat. It's raw, rowdy, and relentlessly alive. If you listen closely enough, it almost starts to make sense. A kind of harmony born from pure disorder. And just like everything else in the tavern, it only gets louder the longer you stay. Once the ale starts flowing and the stew starts settling, the tavern transforms. It's no longer just a place to eat and drink. It becomes a medieval casino, just minus the velvet ropes and with way more yelling. Gambling is the unofficial sport of the evening, and everyone plays, from weathered old soldiers to barefoot boys with borrowed dice. There's no dealer, no pit boss, and 0 regulation. Just a cracked wooden table, a handful of copper coins, and the vague promise that someone is about to lose their dignity. Dice are the game of choice, usually carved from bone, wood, or whatever was lying around. They clatter across the tabletops like rolling thunder, and each toss is followed by a chaotic mix of cheers, groans, and accusations of witchcraft. No one trusts the dice, but everyone uses them. Then there are the cards. If you're in a more cultured part of town, they're thick, hand-painted, worn to the edges, and always missing 1 or 2. The rules seem to shift depending on who's explaining them. Sometimes you're trying to get the highest number, other times you're matching symbols, and sometimes you're just making it up as you go. It's kind of like poker, but with more slapping. Wagers can range from money to mugs to actual livestock. Yes, someone wants to bet their goat. Someone else just bet their boots. And that guy over there, he just bet his own freedom for the night. Spoiler alert, he lost. The regulars are slick. They shuffle quickly, roll their dice slowly, and smile just a little too wide. Of course they're cheating. That's half the fun. A hidden die here, a marked card there, a mysterious cough right when the lucky player leans in to look at their hand. If you win big, you'd better buy a round for the table, or risk getting jumped on your way out. If you lose badly, you just smile, pretend you meant for that to happen, and slowly start pushing your chair back toward the door. Side games are up too. Arm wrestling, thumb wars, and the ever-popular who can drink the most without falling over. The winner earns a round of applause. The loser earns a night sleeping under the table and a headache that will last until the next market day. But even when the rules are unclear and the stakes are completely absurd, the energy is addictive. Because in a medieval tavern, luck isn't just a game. It's a gamble with your purse, your pride, and possibly your pants. As the night deepens and the tavern fills with warmth and humidity, a new kind of performance takes the floor. One made of words, music, and confident nonsense. This is story time, medieval style. A bard clears his throat in the corner, gently plucking at his half-tuned lute, the strings squeaking like old boots. He's missing a few teeth, but he is not missing a single bit of confidence. With a dramatic flourish, he launches into a ballad of heartbreak and heroism, Something about a knight who fell in love with a mermaid and drowned nobly while reciting poetry. No one believes a word of it. Everyone listens anyway. That's just how it works here. Truth is optional. Entertainment is everything. Around the tables, others start to join in. Not bards, just regular patrons with ale-fueled bravery and a tale to tell. One man swears he once wrestled a bear and lived to drink about it. Another claims he saw a witch turn a cow into a goat. A third insists he's related to Charlemagne on his mother's cousin's side. Every story begins with, "You won't believe this, but..." And they're right, we don't. But we want to. Boasts become ballads. Mishaps become myths. Someone tells a joke so bad that it somehow circles all the way back to being good. Someone else recites a poem that was likely plagiarized from a monk's scroll. The room claps, hoots, or throws bread, depending on the quality or quantity of the performance. If you're lucky, a real scop or minstrel might be passing through professionals who travel from town to town, exchanging music for coins, meals, and occasionally a place to sleep indoors. Their songs are more polished, their tales are longer, and their ability to rile up a crowd is dangerously effective. But even they know the golden rule of tavern tales. Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. In this smoke-filled room with the fire crackling and the mugs sloshing, storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's tradition, it's connection. It's how you make friends, enemies, and the occasional lifelong drinking partner. By midnight, half the tavern is reenacting the story of the one-legged knight who fought off 6 highwaymen with a ladle. You laugh, you cheer, you completely forget it's all made up, because in a medieval tavern, every liar is a legend, as long as the story is good enough. As the night deepens and the ale keeps flowing, something changes in the air, a kind of boozy boldness. The bard is halfway through his 3rd song about unfaithful shepherdesses, and suddenly, everyone's feeling romantic. Welcome to medieval flirting. Subtlety has officially left the building. It usually starts with eye contact, or at least one eye, slightly squinting through a mead-induced haze. A man with 2 remaining teeth leans across a bench and slurs, "My lady, your beauty burns brighter than the hearth." She responds by hurling a bread crust at his forehead. The room cheers. That was a good attempt. Others try their luck a bit more gently, offering to refill mugs, delivering clumsy compliments, or making grand offers to help carry a bowl of stew so it doesn't spill. Spoiler alert, it still spills. If you're a woman in the tavern, whether you're staff, a guest, or a traveling merchant, you're likely used to fending off at least 3 would-be poets, 2 arm wrestlers, and 1 man who tries to impress you by balancing a knife on his nose. Sometimes, believe it or not, it works. Usually it ends with a black eye or an empty purse. For those who are actually seeking companionship, taverns offer more than just clumsy flirting. Courtesans often work the room with a practiced, professional ease, knowing exactly who has coin, who has charm, and who is going to pass out before they can even make it up the stairs. The transactions are discreet, but the implications are loud, and jealous lovers. Oh yes, nothing sparks a tavern fight faster than a stolen glance, a wandering hand, or a husband catching his wife laughing just a little too hard at the bard's joke about bishops. Tables are overturned. Mugs are weaponized. A bench gets broken in half. Again. And yet, somewhere in the middle of all this absolute chaos, genuine sparks do fly. A shy baker's daughter and a travelling stonemason end up laughing over a shared bowl of stew. 2 drunk farmers bond over a mutual hatred of turnips. A monk accidentally flirts with a nun, and things get weirdly adorable. Love, or at least something like it, manages to survive in even the rowdiest of corners. Because in the medieval tavern, romance is equal parts charm, chance, and not falling face first into your bowl mid-sentence. You might win a heart, or you might earn a slap. Either way, you're going to remember it, or at least hear all about it the next morning. It was bound to happen. Maybe someone spilled a drink. Maybe someone accused someone else of cheating at dice. Maybe 2 people claimed the same bench, and neither one was willing to back down. Or maybe just maybe, someone said something about someone else's mother's goat or soup. It doesn't really matter what the reason was. Suddenly, it's on. The tavern, which just a moment ago was a blur of music and mugs, turns on a dime. A stool flies through the air. A tankard crashes to the floor. Someone yells, "Hold my bread!" and launches themselves over a bench with all the grace of a drunk catapult. No one is surprised. In fact, most people don't even stop drinking. A bar fight in the Middle Ages isn't a rare event. It's expected. It's practically a feature of the establishment. And while it sounds terrifying, it's usually more comedic than it is deadly. People swing wildly, miss completely, trip over their own feet, and land face first in someone else's dinner. Hair is pulled, beards are grabbed, and shirts are torn. The tavern keeper roars like a battlefield general while holding a ladle in one hand and a heavy club in the other. Occasionally, someone joins the fight with absolutely no idea why it started. They just saw some action and decided to leap in, fists first. Others are placing informal bets on the outcome, cheering on their favorite brawler, or just calmly sliding their mugs out of the splash range. Weapons are rare. Most folks know better than that. Pulling a blade in a crowded tavern can turn a casual brawl into a full-blown, deadly tavern legend. And nobody wants to get banned from the only place in town that serves hot food and warm ale. Eventually, someone hits the floor and decides to stay there. Someone else stumbles into a wall and decides that's as good a place as any to sit down and rethink their life choices. The fight burns out just like a tavern candle suddenly, and without any ceremony. And here's the strange part. Once it's over, it's over. The fighters are separated, their mugs are refilled, someone starts up a song, and within 10 minutes, everyone is laughing again, including the guy with the now bleeding nose. There are no grudges, no lawsuits, just bruises, new stories to tell, and maybe a new nickname like One-Eyed Arnold or Bench Breaker Bill. Because in a medieval tavern, a good fight is just part of a good night. It's messy, ridiculous, and weirdly bonding. And as long as no one gets hurt too badly, it's just another round of entertainment for everyone else. So, the brawl's over, the bard has passed out mid-ballad, and your stomach is full of mystery stew and slightly fermented cider. It's time to sleep, or at least attempt to. But don't expect a featherbed and lavender-scented linens. This is a medieval tavern, not a spa. If the tavern offers lodging, it's likely up a creaky staircase, past slanted floors and beams that are low enough to test your skull's durability. The rooms are small, cold, and absolutely shared. Privacy is a concept that doesn't exist here. You're sleeping shoulder to shoulder with a group of complete strangers, some of whom are snoring like church bells, while others are dreaming loudly in languages you've never even heard before. The beds. Technically, most are just straw-stuffed mattresses. They're thin, lumpy, and crawling with what medieval folks fondly called companions. You lie down fully clothed, boots still on, with your dagger under your pillow not for comfort, but as a defensive strategy. The blankets are shared, and so are the smells. And if someone had garlic for dinner, and someone always had garlic, it will become an intimate part of your dreams. If you're too poor or too drunk for a room, you sleep downstairs. On a bench, under a table, or just curled up in a corner by the hearth, possibly next to a dog that may or may not belong to the tavern. You will be stepped on, you will probably be sneezed on, and there's a good chance you'll be used as a footrest by someone stumbling around in the dark. The tavern never really quiets down. Even after the last mug is drained and the last fight is patched up, there's always someone muttering in their sleep, a log popping and crackling in the fire, or a distant fart echoing through the rafters. And yet somehow, you drift off. It's not comfortable, and it's definitely not clean, but it's safe enough. The dying fire keeps the worst of the cold away. The tavern keeper keeps watch with one eye open and a club in hand, and all the noise eventually becomes its own kind of lullaby, familiar, human, and alive. You'll wake up with a sore neck, a dry mouth, and a questionably acquired bruise, But for a few hours, you get to sleep in the company of travelers, rogues, farmers, and fools. There are no kings here, no silence, just snoring, straw, and the faint hope that your boots will still be there come morning. Dawn creeps in like an uninvited guest, sliding pale light through the cracks in the shutters and poking at your eyelids with merciless persistence. The tavern has changed overnight. It's not quieter exactly, but it's quieter in a defeated sort of way. You crack open one eye. Someone's boot is on your chest. Someone else is mumbling in their sleep about sheep taxes. The bard is snoring under a table, clutching his lute like a lover. A chicken hops across the floor, pecking at yesterday's bread crusts. No one questions where the chicken came from. The fire has died down, leaving the room cold and smoky. A few patrons begin to stir, groaning like wounded warriors returning from battles that were fought entirely inside their own skulls. One man sits up, looks around the room, and immediately lies back down, having decided that today just isn't worth it. The tavern keeper is already up, because of course they are, clattering mugs, sweeping the old straw into fresh piles, and reheating something in a pot that smells both inviting and slightly vengeful. They shoot a look at the bodies scattered on the floor, then bang a ladle against a mug like a morning bell from hell. Up or out. That's your wake-up call. There's no breakfast buffet. If you're lucky, there's more pottage, which is now even thicker than it was last night. The bread is rewarmed over the fire, the ale is watered down, and no one has the strength left to complain. Some patrons just dunk their heads in a barrel of rainwater outside and call it clean living. You check your pouch, 2 coins and a button. Better than you expected. Your boots are still here. One of them has what looks like a bite mark on it, but they're yours. That's a win. A few new faces begin to trickle in early risers, travelers on their way out, and workers in need of a quick drink before dealing with livestock, taxes, or even worse, their neighbours. The tavern begins to stir again, like a great beast slowly waking up. Someone starts retelling a story from last night. It's already changed, of course. In this version, there were 2 fights, and the bard's song actually summoned a ghost. Everyone nods along like it's gospel. The night was chaos. The morning is groggy, grimy, and full of regret. And yet, you can't help but smile, because somehow you survived it. By now, you've felt the sweat, the smoke, and the sticky ale under your boots. You've survived the shouting, the flirting, the pottage, and possibly even a flying bench. And through all of that, one thing becomes crystal clear. The medieval tavern wasn't just a drinking hole. It was the beating heart of the entire community. In a world with no phones, no newspapers, and no social networks, the tavern was where news travelled. A merchant from the coast could share gossip from a foreign port. A soldier could describe the war from the front lines. A bard could sing songs that stitched people together, even if the lyrics changed every single night. This was a place for connection. Farmers drank beside craftsmen. Pilgrims shared bread with thieves. Strangers became friends, or at least drinking buddies, before the second round was even finished. Here, social classes blurred, rumours were born, alliances were forged, and grudges were either buried or fueled further, depending on how the dice rolled. The tavern was also where business happened. Deals were made, and contracts were sealed with a handshake over splintered tables and spilled cider. It was a court, a confessional, and a theatre stage all at once. You could find a job, lose your purse, get married, or start a feud that would last for generations, all in a single evening. And it offered something else, too, something you couldn't buy at the market or pray for in a chapel. It offered relief. Relief from the cold, from the backbreaking work, from the endless seriousness of just trying to survive medieval life. For a few hours, you could sit near a fire, hear a bad joke, sing an even worse song, and forget, just briefly, how hard and unforgiving the outside world really was. Even if the ale was warm, the bed was itchy, and the food had more bones than broth, the tavern gave you a sense of being alive among the living. And in an age where everything from disease to war to a sharp winter could take you without warning, that was no small thing. So when you stepped into a medieval tavern, you weren't just buying a drink. You were buying belonging, story, and maybe, if the floor wasn't too crowded, a place to sleep where the fire still burned. Long before cafes and pubs and coffee houses, there was the tavern, loud, dirty, honest, and absolutely unforgettable. Before she became the most iconic face of ancient Egypt, immortalized in that famous limestone bust with the high cheekbones and a gaze frozen in serene confidence, Nefertiti was a woman completely cloaked in mystery. Her name means, "the beautiful one has come." But the truth is, no one knows for sure where she actually came from. Some historians believe she was the daughter of a powerful Egyptian official named A, who would later become Pharaoh himself. This would make her a native Egyptian noble, possibly even a cousin of her future husband. Others argue she was a foreign princess, sent to Egypt as part of a strategic marriage alliance from a neighboring kingdom. Her origins are still fiercely debated, but her influence is undeniable. Nefertiti appears in the historical record like a flash of lightning, sudden, brilliant, and completely transformative. She enters the life of the pharaoh Akhenaten, not as a passive queen content to stay in the background, but as an equal partner in a reign that would shake Egypt's religious and cultural foundations to its very core. Together, this power couple would dismantle centuries of tradition, discard the entire pantheon of gods worshipped for millennia, and elevate a single deity, the sun disk, known as the Atenas, the one and only true god. It was a radical, almost heretical move. And Nefertiti wasn't just watching from the throne. She was a central figure in this revolution. She was depicted leading religious ceremonies, making offerings directly to the Aten, and was even shown in artwork smiting the enemies of Egypt, a powerful, violent role that was almost exclusively reserved for male pharaohs. Unlike other queens who were often relegated to the background of history, Nefertiti was ever present. In fact, she appears in more surviving artwork from the Amarna period than even Akhenaten himself. In these depictions, she isn't shown in subservience. She stands tall, sometimes rendered the same size as her husband, holding symbols of power, quite literally in her hands. In a society where the pharaoh was considered a god on earth, her incredible proximity to Akhenaten, both spiritually and politically, suggested something more. Perhaps she wasn't just a queen. Perhaps she was a co-ruler. But this revolutionary rise to power wasn't without tension. Egypt, as a whole, was not ready for this kind of upheaval. The old priesthood, who had held immense power for centuries, deeply resented the loss of their gods, their temples, and their influence. The capital city was moved from Thebes to a brand new custom-built city called Akhetaten, known today as Amarna, physically cutting ties with the old ways. And through all of this turmoil, Nefertiti was there, her elegant figure etched into stone walls, her name sung in hymns to the sun. Yet for all her visibility in life, her death or disappearance is a complete and utter vanishing act. There is no confirmed tomb, no body has ever been identified, and there is no record of her end. Just silence. It's as if history, after showcasing her brilliance for over a decade, suddenly chose to look away. And that, perhaps, is where her true legend really begins. To understand Nefertiti's rise, you first have to meet the man who changed everything, Pharaoh Akhenaten. He wasn't born with that name. He was originally Amenhotep IV, a prince in line with a 1,000-year-old legacy of gods and traditions. But something shifted inside him. Some historians call it a moment of divine inspiration. Others suggest it was a form of madness. When he became king, he turned his back on the mighty god Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, and declared a new, singular truth. There was only one god worth worshipping, the physical sun itself, the Aten. This wasn't just a small religious shift. It was a cultural earthquake that cracked the very bedrock of Egyptian civilization. Imagine a society entirely built around a complex system of temples, priests and rituals, being told overnight that their gods were false and their worship was obsolete. Akhenaten didn't just preach monotheism, he enforced it. The grand temples of Amun were shut down. The god's name was systematically chiseled off monuments across the country. Statues were smashed. Entire cities tied to the old gods were abandoned. In their place, Akhenaten built something entirely new. His capital city, Akhetaten. It was a city dedicated solely to the Aten, strategically placed in a bay of cliffs where the sun would rise directly between them, bathing the city in its sacred light. And through all of this, Nefertiti stood right at his side, not as a silent consort, but as a full participant. In the famous reliefs of the period, she's shown worshipping the Aten with the same reverence and authority as Akhenaten. Their daughters are often depicted with them, their small heads tilted up toward the radiant sun disk, whose rays end in tiny hands that offer life to the royal family. It was a family portrait unlike anything seen in Egyptian art before or since. Even the style of the art itself changed dramatically. It was no longer stiff, formal, and idealized. The new Amarna style was loose, exaggerated, and sometimes shockingly intimate. We see the king and queen kissing, playing with their children, and praying in soft flowing robes beneath the sun. And Nefertiti was everywhere in this new world. At times, she even seemed to overshadow her husband. Some historians believe she held real, tangible political power, maybe even acting as an official co-regent. There are some inscriptions that refer to her with a new name, Neferuaten, which some believe she adopted when she began ruling in her own right. It's unclear if Akhenaten shared the throne out of love, strategy, or pure necessity, but one thing was clear. Without Nefertiti, this revolution may not have held together for as long as it did. But revolutions are fragile. The old gods don't take kindly to being replaced. And the people of Egypt, they were quietly watching, waiting for the old order to inevitably return. By the height of her influence, Nefertiti had become more than just a queen. She had become an icon, not just of beauty, but of divine femininity and incredible royal power. Egypt had certainly seen great and powerful queens before, like Hatshepsut, who ruled as a male pharaoh. But Nefertiti's presence felt different. She wasn't ruling from the shadows or taking power through military might. She was actively reshaping the spiritual and cultural fabric of Egypt right beside her husband, in real time, as a living goddess on earth. She bore Akhenaten 6 daughters, Meritaten, Meketaten, Ankhesenpaten, who would later marry Tutankhamun, and 3 others. All of them were frequently depicted in these intimate family scenes beneath the life-giving rays of the Aten. But curiously, no sons were ever officially confirmed or depicted. In a kingdom completely obsessed with male lineage and heirs, this was both a major political problem and a fascinating historical mystery. Was it just fate, or was something else at play? Some have suggested that Akhenaten may have had sons with other lesser wives. But what is certain is that motherhood was absolutely central to Nefertiti's public image. In the art of the time, Nefertiti is often portrayed cradling her children, their tiny arms reaching up to touch her cheeks. These aren't the stiff, cold statues of the past. These are living, breathing moments carved in stone, intimate, emotional, and radiant with life. In an age where pharaohs were often depicted as distant, untouchable gods, Nefertiti's portrayal as a nurturing mother softened the divine, making the royal family appear more human. Yet, there was another side to her iconography, one that was far more powerful. In multiple depictions, Nefertiti wears the distinctive blue crown, a war crown that was typically reserved for male rulers in active command. She is shown smiting Egypt's enemies, riding in chariots, and making offerings directly to the Aten without Akhenaten even present beside her. These were not just symbolic gestures. This was a queen performing the sacred duties of a king. It suggests a quiet but radical truth. Nefertiti may have been preparing for something more than just a partnership. She may have been preparing to rule alone. Whispers in history suggest that as Akhenaten's health began to decline, possibly due to genetic disorders common in royal families, or the immense stress of his revolution, Nefertiti took on more and more governing responsibility. But this is where the historical record, once so full of her presence, starts to fade into darkness. In the final years of Akhenaten's reign, she simply vanishes from the public eye. There's no fanfare, no funeral inscriptions, no confirmed burial. Did she die young? Did she fall from power? Or was she about to become something even greater than a queen something that history tried and failed to completely erase? One day, Nefertiti was everywhere, etched into temple walls, praised in hymns, ruling alongside a revolutionary pharaoh. And then, like a breath in the desert wind, she was gone. No ancient Egyptian queen had ever been so visible, so central to a pharaoh's reign. Yet, around year 12 of Akhenaten's 17-year rule, the records grow eerily silent. Her name disappears from the inscriptions. Her image fades from the art. There is no grand tomb, no death announcement, no scene of mourning carved for her. For a woman so central to Egypt's greatest cultural upheaval, her absence is more than just strange. It's a black hole in the historical record. So, what happened to her? One theory suggests the simplest answer. She died. Childbirth was incredibly risky, even for royalty, and diseases were rampant. Nefertiti's second daughter, Meketaten, also disappears from the records around this same time, and a carving in the royal tomb at Amarna shows what appears to be the family mourning her death, possibly during childbirth. This could indicate a dual tragedy, a mother and daughter lost in the same dark moment. But if that were true, why was there no elaborate funeral for the queen, no grand tribute, no temple dedicated to her memory? This was a woman revered like a goddess. A quiet death just doesn't fit the script. Others propose something far more political. Perhaps Nefertiti fell from favor. Maybe the tides turned within the royal court. Akhenaten, who was becoming increasingly isolated and possibly more erratic, could have sidelined her, perhaps in favor of another consort. Some suggest that a mysterious co-ruler named Smenkhkare, an enigmatic figure who appears very briefly in the historical record at the end of Akhenaten's reign, may have replaced her. Was this a male heir, a half-brother, or was Smenkhkare actually Nefertiti herself, ruling under a new name? And that is the most electrifying theory of all, that Nefertiti didn't disappear. She transformed. There is evidence to suggest that someone named Neferuaten ruled as pharaoh in the final years of Akhenaten's reign. This individual used feminine grammar in some inscriptions and even referenced Akhenaten as her beloved husband. Could this have been Nefertiti, crowned as a pharaoh in her own right? If so, she would have joined the rarest ranks in Egyptian history, becoming a female king like Hatshepsut before her. But even this theory dissolves into the sand. Neferuaten's reign ends abruptly, and then comes a name that is far more familiar. Tutankhaten, the boy who would later become Tutankhamun. He would reverse his parents' reforms and restore the old gods. If Nefertiti did reign alone, her rule was short-lived. And if she was Smenkhkare or Neferuaten, she ruled as a ghost queen, visible only in tantalizing hints, half-carved cartouches, and broken relics, a puzzle missing its centerpiece. And so, just as suddenly as she arrived, the most powerful woman in Egypt disappears. But her legend, that was just beginning to take shape, as the dust of the Amarna revolution began to settle, a new figure emerged from the chaos. A boy king, barely old enough to hold a scepter. His name was Tutankhaten, later changed to Tutankhamun, and he would eventually become the most famous pharaoh in the entire world, not for what he did in his life, but for the incredible, untouched treasures found in his tomb thousands of years later. But what matters to our story is this: who was his mother? the historical records are frustratingly silent on this crucial point. Genetic testing has confirmed that his father was almost certainly Akhenaten, but the identity of his mother remains one of Egypt's greatest unsolved mysteries. Some scholars have long argued that Nefertiti was simply his powerful stepmother, and that his biological mother was one of Akhenaten's lesser-known secondary wives. Others, however, speculate that she may have been his biological mother after all, pointing to art and timing that seemed to place him as a young child during her final public appearances. If Nefertiti truly did bear Tutankhamun, it would make a lot of sense. His early reign was clearly guided by a very steady and experienced hand. His decisions to reverse his father's religious revolution, to abandon the city of Amarna and restore the old gods, were not moves that a child would have made on his own. And that's where the intrigue really deepens. Who was steering the ship during Tutankhamun's fragile reign? The boy king was only about 9 years old when he took the throne. A child can't restore a religious empire alone. Someone was behind the scenes, pulling the strings. Someone experienced in court politics, religion, and the power of public symbolism. Could it have been Nefertiti, ruling from the shadows as the queen regent? Or was it the high priest Ai, her possible father, who was positioning himself to take power? Or perhaps both were working together to erase the chaos of Amarna and return Egypt to its old familiar gods. One of the more compelling pieces of evidence comes from a golden shrine that was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It shows a queen anointing the young king. That woman has features that are eerily similar to the known portraits of Nefertiti. If that was her, it means she may not have vanished at all, but rather stayed right at the heart of power in a more discreet and protected form. Still, without a named tomb, and without a confirmed mummy, we are left with only fragments and theories. If she did guide Tutankhamun, her fingerprints are everywhere in his early reign, but her name is gone, scrubbed from temples and left out of the official king lists, as though someone made a concentrated effort to erase the memory of a woman who once ruled like a god. And yet the irony is incredibly rich. It was Tutankhamun's fame that would ultimately resurrect her image, because in searching for his story, the world stumbled upon hers. For someone who stood at the absolute center of Egypt's most radical era, a queen, a priestess, a possible pharaoh Nefertiti, left behind no confirmed tomb. Not a single monument bears her death rites. There is no sarcophagus with her name on it, no golden funerary mask, and no inscription whispering her final words to the gods. It's as though she just evaporated. This complete absence has haunted Egyptologists for over a century. In a culture that was completely obsessed with the afterlife, where every noble of any standing was carefully embalmed, mummified, and buried with detailed instructions for the soul's journey, how could one of the most powerful women in all of Egyptian history be so completely lost? Theories, of course, abound. One possibility is that she was buried hastily and without ceremony in the chaotic waning years of the Amarna period. Perhaps her radical legacy made her a dangerous figure in the eyes of the new regime that followed Akhenaten. Her tomb may have been dismantled, her name defaced, as part of the sweeping, systematic effort to erase the memory of her husband's heresy. After all, the return to the traditional gods was swift and absolute, and vengeance carved in stone and chiseled out of hieroglyphs was a common practice. Another, more tantalizing theory suggests that her tomb was never truly lost. It was simply misidentified, or it's still hidden. Some researchers have proposed that she lies within the Valley of the Kings itself, concealed behind the walls of Tutankhamun's own tomb. In 2015, this idea exploded onto the world stage when initial radar scans of KV-62, the famed tomb of King Tut, indicated the possible existence of hidden chambers behind the painted walls. Was Nefertiti buried just inches away, sealed off and forgotten for millennia beneath layers of history and gold? That idea captured the world's imagination. A legendary queen, sleeping just beyond our reach. Egyptologists held their breath. But further, more advanced scans yielded inconclusive and conflicting results. The initial excitement waned, excavations slowed, funding dried up, And once again, Nefertiti retreated back into the realm of myth. Yet her absence is loud. We have her images dozens, perhaps hundreds of them. Her likeness is captured in stone and in pigment. And of course her bust, now in Berlin, still gazes out with that unfathomable grace across the museum glass, as if she knows something that we don't, as if she's just waiting. Every year, new digs continue in Amarna and in the Valley of the Kings. Every year, whispers stir. Could a sealed chamber finally give up her secrets? Could a cartouche, forgotten in the sand, finally spell out her true name? Or is she destined to remain the eternal riddle, an unfinished sentence in the grand story of Egypt? If history tried to bury her, it didn't succeed for long. Because the search for Nefertiti never truly stopped. It only deepened. If her tomb was never found and her body was never identified, why do we still remember Nefertiti so vividly? The answer sits behind museum glass, beneath soft lights in Berlin's Neues Museum. It's a painted limestone sculpture that has captivated the entire world since its rediscovery in 1912, the bust of Nefertiti. She gazes forward with an impossible poise and serenity. Her long neck is graceful, her blue crown is distinct, and her facial features are so refined and symmetrical they almost feel modern. One eye is famously unfinished, lined with black coal, but missing the inlaid quartz pupil. This was perhaps left that way intentionally by the artist, or maybe it was just a forgotten detail as the workshop was abandoned in a hurry. Yet, even incomplete, she is timeless. She is unforgettable. The bust was discovered by a German archaeologist named Ludwig Borchardt in the ruins of the royal sculptor Thutmose's studio at Amarna. When he brushed away the centuries of dust and revealed her face, he knew instantly what he had found. In his private diary, he wrote a now famous line: "No use describing it, you have to see it." And once the world did, Nefertiti became not just a historical figure, but a global symbol, a symbol of beauty, of power, of ancient enigma. But even her iconic bust is not without controversy. Germany acquired the artifact during a time of loose antiquities laws, when foreign archaeological teams were often allowed to keep a share of their discoveries. Egypt has been officially requesting its return for decades. To the Egyptians, she is a stolen piece of their heritage, who belongs at home in the land whose sun once touched her skin, where she once stood beneath the Aten's rays. But Germany has consistently refused to let her go. They claim her extreme fragility makes her unsafe to travel. Others say it's more about prestige. Nefertiti brings in enormous crowds. She is, after all, their Mona Lisa. Still, her presence, wherever she may be, has completely changed how the world sees ancient women. She wasn't just a passive beauty. Her bust captures something regal, assertive, and almost challenging. She looks like someone who held secrets, made world-changing decisions, and altered the course of empires. And she did all of those things. It's truly remarkable how a single sculpture, so delicate and silent, can resurrect someone who was so thoroughly lost to time. We may never find her tomb. We may never know for certain how she died. But through this bust, Nefertiti achieved something extraordinary. She became immortal, not in gold or stone, but in human memory. The face may be still, but the story it tells continues to speak louder than ever across the centuries. Nefertiti's story lives somewhere in the space between stone and silence, between what we know for certain and what we desperately want to believe. Few figures in ancient history have inspired such relentless fascination and such a profound, enduring mystery. She is a paradox. One of the most well-documented women of her time, and yet still, she is largely unknowable. Over the centuries, she's been imagined as many different things. To some, she was a goddess in human form, the living embodiment of divine beauty. To others, she was a political mastermind, the true force behind the throne, and perhaps even the throne itself. Some have portrayed her as a tragic romantic figure. a queen who supported her husband's radical dream only to be lost in the sands of his failed revolution. Others paint her as ambitious, even ruthless, navigating a collapsing empire with a cool elegance and a sharp political calculation. But what do we truly know? We know she was far more than just a royal wife. Her imagery rivals that of kings. Her prominent presence during religious rites, royal ceremonies, and even in scenes of battle reveals a woman who was not just standing beside power, but actively wielding it. In a deeply patriarchal world, she carved out her own space, not through outright rebellion, but through sheer presence, through poise, and through a masterful command of the visual and spiritual language of her time. We know she was central to one of history's boldest religious shifts. While Akhenaten may have been the one who envisioned the monotheistic sun cult, it was Nefertiti who embodied it. She was the beautiful human face of a divine ideal, the bridge between the Aten in the sky and the people on the ground. She didn't just serve her god, she was a key part of his image. And we know that after her disappearance, her memory was very nearly erased. The backlash against Akhenaten's regime was so severe that it swept her name into oblivion. Her statues were smashed, her inscriptions were defaced, and her role in history was intentionally and methodically buried. Yet here we are, more than 3,000 years later, still whispering her name. Why? Because myth has a way of surviving where facts cannot. Because when a woman becomes both an icon and an enigma, she slips into a space where time can't quite reach her. Because sometimes, the questions we ask echo much louder than the answers we find. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how Nefertiti would have wanted it. To be remembered, but not fully explained. To be admired, but never completely contained. To live forever, not as a woman in one single tomb, but as a queen of endless speculation. More than 3 millennia have passed since Nefertiti last walked beneath Egypt's sun. Yet her shadow still stretches across our modern world, etched in museum glass, whispered through the halls of academia, and splashed across the pages of novels and the screens of documentaries. Unlike most historical figures, she hasn't faded into the dusty past. If anything, she just grows larger and more compelling with time. There's something completely irresistible about her story. It's not just the legendary beauty we've seen beauty before, it's the mystery. The deliberate blank spaces in her biography almost feel like a challenge, a taunt from across the ages, as if she's daring us to try and understand her, knowing full well that we never truly will. And in that way, she's become something more than historical. She's become archetypal. Every generation reinterprets Nefertiti in its own image. In the early 20th century, she was seen as an exotic, mysterious, and submissive queen. During the feminist wave of the 70s, she became a symbol of female power, an ancient ruler whose story was lost to patriarchal erasure. In modern media, she's a style icon, a powerful African queen, a cunning political player, and even a possible pharaoh who ruled a vast empire. She has lived 1,000 second lives, not through established facts, but through our collective imagination. But maybe that's the most fitting afterlife of all. In ancient Egypt, achieving immortality wasn't just about mummification and a grand tomb. It was about memory. If your name was still spoken, if your image was still seen, and if your story was still retold, then you truly lived on. You could travel the mythological field of reeds, you could dine with the gods, and you could exist forever, beyond death. Nefertiti, whether by her own design or by a strange twist of chance, has achieved that more perfectly than almost any other pharaoh. Her name is spoken on every continent. Her face is one of the most recognized in all of human history. And her story, though fractured and incomplete, still commands our absolute attention. So, in a way, her greatest legacy wasn't something she carved into a temple wall or had sealed away in a golden tomb. It was this enduring, unquenchable curiosity that she left behind. She left us with a perfect mystery, a life half seen, half erased, and wholly unforgettable. And perhaps that was her final, greatest act of power. Not just to rule an empire, not just to shape a religion or raise royal daughters, but to become timeless. Nefertiti, the beautiful one who has come, never truly left. She remains here, in our questions, in our wonder, and in our deep-seated need to remember the women that history tried so hard to forget. She lives on, not in gold or in glory, but in the eternal act of being searched for. And what could possibly be more immortal than that? In the misty mountains of southern China, where the clouds hang low and the wind hums through ancient bamboo groves, a dragon lies coiled. But this is no myth, no fire-breathing beast of legend. This dragon is made of earth and stone, carved by centuries of calloused hands and a patient, unwavering vision. These are the Longji Rice Terraces, known to locals as the dragon's backbone, and its curves ripple across the mountainside like shimmering scales, alive with water, rice, and a deep, ancient pride. From a distance, the terraces truly do resemble a sleeping creature. The hills ripple with a stunning rhythmic precision, each layer rising and falling like the sinew and muscle of a living form. But if you step closer, you'll find something even more alive. Water flows in soft whispers along channels that were carefully dug by hand. Young rice seedlings flutter in the breeze, and at dawn, the morning mist drapes the landscape like breath rising from the dragon's nostrils. These terraces weren't built in a hurry. Their story began over 700 years ago, when the Zhuang and Yao peoples, ethnic minorities with incredibly deep ties to these mountains, chose to tame the steep slopes rather than abandon them. Flat land was scarce, and machinery was non-existent. And so they looked to the mountain and asked a simple, profound question. How do we feed ourselves here? The answer took generations to build. Armed with little more than stone tools and bamboo baskets, they began to carve the hills, inch by inch, year by year. With each level they built, they not only shaped the land, they taught it to breathe with them. Rainfall became a resource. The steep slope became a source of sustenance, and rice, the staple of life, began to grow where only gravity had once ruled. Over time, the terraces began to take on the shape of a dragon in repose strong, eternal, and sacred. This was more than just agriculture. This was harmony. It was a silent pact made between humans and nature. No part of the mountain was wasted, and no part was forced to bend violently to their will. Instead, the people worked with the earth, shaping it in elegant curves and swells, listening to the direction of the wind and following the natural path of the water. Today, the dragon's backbone still feeds entire villages. But more than that, it stands as a breathtaking reminder of what patience can build. In a world that is constantly racing forward, here lies a dragon that was never chased, only carved. Layer by layer, dream by dream. To walk among the Longji Rice Terraces is to step into a world carved by pure persistence. There is no illusion here, no hidden machine tracks, no corporate survey markers. What stretches across these mountains are the living fingerprints of human endurance. Every curve, every slope, and every single drop of water has been carefully arranged, stone by stone, with hands that knew the very pulse of the land. Centuries ago, when the Zhuang and Yao peoples first looked upon these steep and unforgiving hillsides, they didn't see obstacles. They saw opportunity. The fertile valley lands were already taken, the flat plains already sown. But up here, amid the rugged peaks, there was possibility, if only they could make the earth listen. With no heavy tools, they began their work. They used wooden shovels, stone hoes, and carried baskets of mud and rubble on backs that were worn by time. Slowly, the terraces began to form horizontal veins cutting across the mountain, held in place by hand-stacked stone walls. These weren't just accidental cuts into the slope. They were brilliantly calculated. Each level had to be perfectly balanced, not only to hold the water needed for the rice, but to carry the overflow from one tier down to the next without any waste. One miscalculation could cause an entire section to collapse. If it was too steep, the water would rush away. If it was too flat, the water would stagnate. So they measured, not with rulers, but with generations of shared intuition. Children learned from their elders. The elders watched the changing seasons. And the mountain, in time, gave in not with a sense of surrender, but with a feeling of trust. The result is a landscape that defies nature by flowing perfectly with it. From the valley base all the way up to the cloud-kissed peaks, these terraces rise like a giant spiral staircase to the sky. They mirror the natural topography with an elegance that makes it seem as if the mountain grew them itself. But no, the mountain didn't shape these curves. Humans did. With no engines, no concrete, and no architectural degrees, just time, just trial and error, and just the unwavering belief that land, no matter how steep, can be made to serve life. Today, these terraces remain fully functional. They are still farmed, still repaired by hand, and still deeply respected. There are no bulldozers, no shortcuts. The old ways survive here, not because they are resisting the future, but because they proved something incredibly rare. That tradition, when it is rooted deep enough, can outlast every single storm. If the dragon's backbone is made of muscle and bone, then water is its blood. It flows quietly, without any pumps or engines, tracing the ancient channels that slip from mountaintop springs down into every single terrace below. This incredible hydraulic choreography is no accident. It is the secret life of the terraces, and it is the very reason they've endured for all these centuries. At the top of the mountain, rainwater and natural springs are caught and collected in narrow ditches and earthen canals. From there, gravity becomes the farmer's silent, perfect ally. The water descends through terrace after terrace, pooling gently in each field before spilling over into the next. This fluid, seamless design ensures that every patch of rice receives exactly what it needs, no more and no less. There are no modern valves or switches. Control lies in subtle, handmade gates made of stone or wood, which are adjusted by hand and by habit. If one terrace overflows, it could flood the one below it. If one leaks, a drought may follow for the fields further down. And so the villagers, who are the guardians of this delicate system, walk the ridges daily, checking, adjusting, and just listening to the sound of the flow. It's less like farming and more like playing a complex musical instrument. One wrong note and the whole song is off. But the water does more than just feed the rice. It mirrors the sky. In the spring, when the terraces are first flooded, the paddies turn to glass. They reflect the clouds, the sun, and even the stars on a clear night. Visitors often describe the sight as surreal, like the mountain has become a living mirror, reflecting both heaven and earth at the same time. Then comes the summer, and the water thickens with the vibrant green stalks of young rice. The reflection fades, replaced by movement, as the rippling rice plants sway in the wind like an emerald sea. In autumn, the water glistens through the rich gold of the ripened grain. And in the winter, when the farming ceases, snow and frost often replace the flowing current. The dragon sleeps, but the channels remain quiet veins, patiently awaiting the spring. Time moves differently here. It's not measured by hours, but by moisture, by the first trickle of the mountain thaw, by the sound of frogs returning to the paddies, by the rich scent of wet soil. In a world that measures time in seconds, the people of Longji still measure it in seasons and in drops of water. And so the dragon lives on, not in fire and flight, but in ripples of water, pulsing gently through a living masterpiece of stone and soil. Spring in the Longji Mountains begins not with blossoms, but with water. As the snow melts in the higher peaks, streams begin to trickle downward, breathing life back into the waiting terraces. The mirror-like paddies are ready. The dragon stirs, and the people prepare for the ancient ritual that ties them to every generation that came before them. Planting the first seeds. There is no grand announcement, only quiet, purposeful movement. Farmers, both young and old, rise with the mist. They walk barefoot along the narrow earthen ridges, their straw hats pulled low over their eyes, carrying baskets of seedlings balanced carefully on their backs. The air is thick with the rich scent of soaked soil and cool mountain wind. The paddies, which were flooded just days earlier, now shimmer like polished jade under the morning sun. This is not a task for machines. It never has been. Each individual rice seedling, which has been carefully grown in nursery beds, is transplanted by hand, one by one, line by meticulous line. The workers step into the cold, calf-deep water and press the tender green stalks into the soft mud with gentle, practiced fingers. It's a rhythm that feels almost sacred. Backs bent, arms outstretched, hands pressing into the earth. Repeat. All day long, sometimes for weeks on end. Children often follow behind, splashing in the shallows and mimicking their elders. They learn their future trade not from textbooks, but by standing right there in the water, feeling the resistance of the mud, and learning the correct spacing by eye. It's how knowledge survives here, lived, not just spoken. This planting is more than just labor, it is a ceremony. Offerings of rice wine and incense are made to the mountain spirits. Traditional songs are sung to encourage a bountiful harvest. In some villages, the elders will scatter the first handful of seedlings as a blessing for the fields. Every field that is planted is a promise to the land, a promise to the ancestors, and a promise to the children who are yet to come. The pace is unhurried. No one rushes the dragon. No one tries to race the mountain. Instead, the steady rhythm of planting becomes a form of meditation, a slow and graceful dance between humans and nature, between patience and purpose. And as the days pass, tiny green shoots begin to rise from the watery fields, like whispers growing louder. From this moment forward, the terraces will grow, not just with rice, but with hope. Each seed is a prayer. Each row is a quiet defiance against both hunger and haste. And so the cycle begins once again, not with noise or with fire, but with hands in the mud and hearts in the sky. The dragon is awake. The mountain breathes. And the future is planted, one seed at a time. Scattered along the ridgelines and nestled in the gentle crooks of the terraces are the very heartbeats of the dragon's backbone. The villages. Places like Ping'an, Dazhai, and Jinkeng. These are not just settlements. They are living museums of heritage, where every home, path, and balcony clings to the mountainside like a memory that refuses to fade. The houses here are built of dark timber, resting on sturdy stilts to protect them from the seasonal rains and the natural steepness of the slope. Their rooftops, heavy and slanted, perfectly mirror the lines of the terraces they overlook. From a distance, they look like little wooden lanterns floating on waves of green. Inside, life is simple, warm, and deeply communal. Multiple generations often share a single home. Meals are cooked over crackling wood fires, and the smell of homemade rice wine and bamboo smoke drifts out into the crisp mountain air. The people who live here belong to ethnic minorities, primarily the Zhuang and the Red Yao, each with their own distinct language, customs, and stories. You'll recognize the Yao women instantly. Their long black hair, which has been uncut since childhood, is coiled into elegant, complex shapes on top of their heads. Some will let it fall like a waterfall of dark silk when they bathe in the river, a scene so graceful it borders on myth. Despite modernization slowly creeping up the mountain trails, traditions here hold strong. You can still see hand-woven clothes being dyed in deep indigo and hear the gentle creaking of wooden looms in quiet rooms. Music is still played on reed pipes and bronze drums during village festivals. Weddings still involve ancient ritual dances, and the harvest is still welcomed with songs of gratitude. Hospitality is not a transaction here, it's a reflex. Guests are immediately offered tea brewed from local leaves, rice wine served in carved gourds, and stories passed down from elders who can still remember what the mountain was like before electricity arrived. They speak of dragons that hide in the mist, of ancestors who first carved these hills, and of the spirits who they believe still guard the fields. And though tourism now brings visitors from every corner of the world, the fundamental rhythm of village life continues. largely undisturbed. The rice still grows. The rituals still mark the passing of the seasons. The terraces, much like the people themselves, endure not by resisting change, but by absorbing it slowly and carefully, like water descending one level at a time. Here, within the dragon's coils, life is not rushed. It flows, it echoes, it remembers. To walk the terraces of Longji is to walk through layers of myth. For the villagers, these hills are not just soil and stone. They're alive with stories that are whispered through the bamboo groves and carried on the wind. These mountains are not merely land. They are sacred beings, shaped by gods, guarded by spirits, and inhabited by tales passed from one generation to the next. The most enduring legend, of course, speaks of a sleeping dragon whose enormous body stretches across the ridges. Its spine rises in great coils, forming the very terraces themselves. Locals believe that the elegant curves of the mountain are not man-made at all, but are actually the dragon's scales, rising and falling with each gentle breath. When the mist rolls in from the valley and covers the paddies in a blanket of white, it is said that the dragon is stirring in its sleep. Another tale tells of how the terraces were born from an act of divine generosity. In a time of great famine, the ancestors climbed the mountains and prayed to the heavens for help. Moved by their devotion, the gods sent rain and instructed them to carve the hills into steps so that rice could grow and feed their people. The people obeyed, and it's said that a dragon appeared from the clouds to guide their hands. Ever since that day, they have honored the mountain with a deep respect, never shouting in the fields and never cutting down trees without first offering a prayer. These beliefs are not written down in books. They live in the songs that are sung during the planting season, in the incense that is burned before a new growing season begins, and in the respectful silence that is kept during misty mornings. Children grow up hearing these tales not as fantasy, but as a truth that is embedded in the very land they walk on. To laugh at the dragon is to risk a bad harvest. To disrespect the spirits is to invite a flood or a drought. There are spirits in the water too. Some farmers still make small offerings before they release the spring water into their terraces for the first time each year. Just a few drops of rice wine, a quiet prayer murmured under their breath. It's not for show, it's just tradition, as natural and as necessary as tying a shoe. And whether you believe in dragons or not, you can't deny that something sacred hangs in the air here. Maybe it's the profound silence. Maybe it's the way the clouds touch the peaks. Or maybe it's the quiet certainty that this place is more than just human work. It's a story that is still being told, written not in ink, but in stone, water, and rice. For centuries, the dragon's backbone was a secret kept by the mountains remote, quiet, and known only to those who called it home. But no place, no matter how sacred, remains untouched forever. Eventually the road came, and then the wires followed. Tourists with their cameras and smartphones began to climb the hills alongside the farmers, and the terraces, ancient and weathered, faced a question they'd never had to answer before. How do you survive the modern world? At first there was worry. Some locals feared that the mountain would be sold, piece by piece, to developers, that concrete would replace wood, and that their ancient culture would be turned into a shallow costume for tourists. But the people of Longji didn't just endure, they adapted. And they did it not by abandoning their past, but by weaving the present into it, one careful thread at a time. Villagers began opening their homes to guests, not as sterile resorts, but as authentic family stays. Visitors now eat local meals with them, sticky rice steamed in bamboo, wild greens that were picked that very morning. They sleep in the traditional wooden stilt houses where roosters still announce the sunrise. The experience isn't curated for show, it's lived, honest, and real. And the farming it continues. Each season, the locals still flood the terraces, still plant every seedling by hand, and still harvest the rice with sickles that have been worn smooth by time. The children may attend school during the day, but they still help in the fields at dusk. Tourism may bring in extra income, but rice is what brings life. One supports the other. Both are essential. Some of the young villagers have left for the big cities, but many of them eventually return. There is something magnetic about these terraces, something that runs deeper than just nostalgia. It's the sound of the water sliding through the channels. It's the way the stars reflect in the flooded paddies at night. It's the way the mountains themselves teach you patience. The local festivals have gotten a little louder, yes. There are now microphones where there were once only drums, and signs in Mandarin and English stand beside the sacred springs. But the rituals still happen. The offerings are still made. The elders still lead the songs. The dragon's backbone didn't resist change. It absorbed it, with grace and with balance. The terraces remain, not because they are frozen in time, but because they breathe with time flexing, adjusting, but never breaking. In an age where tradition is so often sacrificed for progress, Longji stands as quiet, beautiful proof that progress can walk gently if it chooses. That the old ways still have a place in the modern world, especially when they are this beautiful. The dragon's backbone is never the same place twice. With each season, it sheds its skin, transforms its colors, and shifts its entire mood. While our cities might change over the course of years, the terraces change completely in a matter of weeks, draped not just in light, but in rhythm. To stand among them through a full year is to witness a mountain breathe. Spring arrives like a mirror. The terraces are flooded in preparation for planting, and the still shallow water reflects the sky like a mosaic of silver glass. Clouds drift not just above you, but also below your feet. Visitors often speak of a feeling of walking through heaven. The fields look empty, but they are full of pure potential. Beneath the surface, life is stirring. Summer brings a sudden burst of green. The young rice shoots stretch tall and straight, blanketing the hills in a vibrant, emerald cascade. From a distance, the terraces look like ribbons of green velvet, rolling in every direction. The air is warm and wet. Frogs call out from the paddies, and you can see the farmers, knee-deep in water, working from dawn until dusk, their straw hats bobbing like tiny sails on a jade sea. Autumn is gold. This is harvest time. As the rice matures, the terraces catch fire in the sunlight, glowing with the color of ripened grain. The fields ripple like golden waves in the wind, and the sound of drums echoes through the villages. Families gather, songs are sung, and special sticky rice is cooked. It's not just a season, it's a celebration. The dragon, now fully awake, is offering its bounty, and winter draws the mountain into a deep stillness. The harvest is over, the terraces are empty, and the water has been drained. Snow sometimes falls, dusting the earthen steps in a soft, quiet white. Other times, a delicate frost clings to the stone walls like lace. There are no tools in the fields, no voices on the ridges, only silence. The dragon sleeps, resting and waiting. Each season writes its own different poem on the landscape. Spring reflects. Summer grows. Autumn feeds. Winter rests. The beauty of Longji isn't just in its incredible shape, but in its cycle. It's in how it accepts the passage of time without any resistance. It's in how it transforms so quietly, never needing to announce itself. Photographers come here to chase the light, hoping to capture something eternal. But the terraces don't freeze for anyone. They move, they breathe, and they teach us, softly, that true beauty is not static. It's a rhythm, a practice, and a promise that is renewed with every single season. And so the dragon turns once again, not with a roar or with flame, but with water, grain, and wind. In the end, these terraces are more than just fields. They are a vow, a quiet, curved, and living vow, carved into the very side of a mountain. It's a promise that has been passed down from hand to hand, season to season, and generation to generation. The dragon's backbone is not just a wonder of agriculture or a masterpiece of ancient engineering. It is the story of what can happen when human beings choose to live with the land, not against it. There were certainly easier paths. The ancestors of the Longji people could have moved down into the valleys or chased after flatter ground. But they stayed. They studied the slope, they listened to the stone, they followed the water, and in doing so, they made the impossible seem ordinary, feeding entire villages on the side of a mountain. Every single curve here holds a lesson, not just about growing rice, but about patience, about legacy, and about care. These terraces weren't built in years or even decades. They took centuries. There is no shortcut to this kind of harmony, and there is no machine that can replicate the knowledge that has been etched into each stone wall by calloused hands and a quiet, unyielding persistence. And yet, nothing about them feels frozen in time. The terraces are alive. They evolve. They bend with the weather, with the needs of the people, and with the changing shape of the world. And that's their secret. They were never rigid. They were always fluid. Even now, as the modern world climbs these hills with its signals and its screens, the terraces remain grounded. They change, but they do not vanish, because their roots are not just in the soil. They are in story, in ritual, and in the simple, enduring act of planting a seed and trusting the sky. To walk the dragon's backbone is to witness a contract made between humans and the earth, a contract signed with sweat and sun and renewed with every single harvest. It's a powerful reminder that progress does not always have to mean speed, and that greatness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just murmurs, like a stream slipping gently over a stone. And perhaps that is why these terraces speak so deeply to so many people, from farmers to travelers to dreamers, because they represent something we've nearly forgotten, that the most lasting things in this world are not built with force, but with rhythm, with humility, and with time. The dragon sleeps, the people endure, and the mountain remembers. Most visitors to Giza lift their eyes to the sky, drawn to the towering, iconic silhouettes of the pyramids and the enigmatic gaze of the great Sphinx. But very few people ever ask what lies beneath. Under the sand, under the ever-shifting path of the Nile, and under centuries of forgotten currents. For in the quiet shallows near the ancient village of Abu Rawash, just a short distance from the Giza plateau, a strange and persistent tale stirs. It speaks of something enormous, eroded, and almost completely ignored. It speaks of an underwater sphinx. Local fishermen have whispered about it for generations, a smooth-backed shape that seems far too symmetrical to be natural, a feline form half buried in the thick mud and waterlogged sediment. When the Nile's waters recede during periods of drought, parts of it are said to emerge. Stone curves, distinct grooves, and what some who have seen it claim is a carved paw, impossibly worn by time, but unmistakably shaped by human hands. It doesn't sit among the well-trodden tourist routes. There are no guideposts here, no velvet ropes, and no tour buses idling nearby. It's just an area thick with reeds, brackish water, and a profound silence. Explorers who have ventured there claim the land itself feels different, charged somehow, as if a deep memory clings to it. Beneath the murk, sonar scans have picked up strange geometric patterns and what appear to be massive blocks that have been placed with clear intent. But what truly startles are the claims that this figure, this sphinx-like formation, submerged so close to Giza, may predate the pyramids entirely, not by decades, but by millennia, eh? If that were true, it would completely shatter the established chronology of Egyptian civilization. The mainstream timeline confidently anchors the Great Sphinx at around 2500 BCE. But this underwater form, if it is genuinely a man-made carving, could belong to an age when the Sahara was still a green and vibrant savanna, and the Nile ran wild through a wetter, lusher land. Skeptics, of course, dismiss the whole thing as a misidentified rock formation, a classic case of pareidolia, where limestone has been shaped by flowing water and wishful thinking. But the grooves, the curves, the alleged alignment with celestial markers, It all invites more questions than it answers. The site remains unexcavated. Official archaeologists have largely ignored it. Perhaps it's nothing, or perhaps it's everything. A relic not just of Egypt's known past, but of a world that was lost to flood and to time. For now, the so-called underwater Sphinx lies quiet, not sleeping, waiting. And if it could speak, one wonders what secrets it would tell, and why so many people seem so determined not to listen. The legend of the underwater Sphinx moved from whispered folklore into the realm of global curiosity back in the 1980s. That's when a few independent researchers and divers began to publish some very strange reports. They shared accounts of a massive lion-bodied figure that was partially submerged near the Giza Plateau. The early photographs they produced were grainy, inconclusive, and often easily dismissed by mainstream experts. But they sparked something that couldn't be put back in the bottle: curiosity, and more dangerously, doubt. One of the most vocal early proponents was an amateur Egyptologist who claimed to have personally seen a heavily weathered monument deep beneath the silt and flood layers during a brief window of drought. According to him, the figure wasn't just an isolated rock or a trick of erosion. It had clear geometry, it had legs, it had symmetry, and it even had the faint suggestion of a carved face. Naturally, this was a direct challenge to the traditional narrative of ancient Egypt. Egyptology, as a scientific discipline, rests on a very structured and well-established timeline. Most scholars place the construction of the Giza pyramids and the Great Sphinx firmly around 2500 BCE during the reign of the pharaoh Khafre. The suggestion of another Sphinx one that was older and partially submerged would require rethinking not just the history of Egypt, but the timeline of human civilization itself. Mainstream academics responded with extreme caution, and in many cases, outright disdain. Without a peer-reviewed excavation, without carbon dating, and without proper stratigraphic studies, the claims simply couldn't be taken seriously. Many argued that the so-called underwater Sphinx was likely just a natural formation. Limestone, they pointed out, is a soft rock, and it can be easily weathered by thousands of years of Nile flooding and sediment erosion. In Egypt, they correctly pointed out, nature often mimics the intentional. Wind, water, and time are all very capable sculptors, but the photos kept circulating. The sonar readings continued to show these oddly regular, smooth, and suggestive patterns. And then came the theorists. Authors, filmmakers, and fringe historians began to build incredible stories around the mystery. They claimed that the Sphinx was a relic of a long-forgotten civilization, perhaps Atlantean, perhaps a pre-dynastic Egyptian culture that was lost in a great flood that scoured the Sahara. They pointed to the water erosion patterns on the original Great Sphinx, argued for lost technologies, and hinted that whatever lay beneath the Nile might be far, far older than our accepted memory allows. The debate grew louder, but the ground itself remained still. No official dig was ever launched. No museum ever claimed it. And the Sphinx, if that's truly what it is, remained right where it always had been, buried in silt and caught somewhere between myth and mud. The idea that something near Giza might actually predate the pyramids isn't just provocative, it's revolutionary. If the underwater Sphinx is more than just erosion or coincidence, then Egypt's story didn't begin in the 4th dynasty with the pyramid builders. It began long before that, deep in prehistory, a time when the Sahara was a green and sprawling savanna, and the Nile roamed wider, wilder, and far less predictably than it does today. This possibility gained some serious traction in the 1990s, when the geologist Dr. Robert Schoch began studying the Great Sphinx itself. He argued that the deep, vertical weathering patterns seen on the Sphinx's enclosure wall were not caused by wind and sand, but by thousands of years of heavy, sustained rainfall. This was a type of rainfall that hadn't been seen on the Giza Plateau since at least 7000 BCE. His findings pushed the possible date of the Great Sphinx back by thousands of years, to a time well before the first pharaohs ever carved their names into stone. So, if water shaped the original Sphinx, could water also have hidden an even older sibling? The so-called underwater Sphinx sits in a lower region, right near ancient floodplains. Some satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar scans suggest the possibility of foundations, rectangular outlines, and deliberate shaping, all buried beneath layers of silt and seasonal water. These signs hint that the site may not just be older than the Sphinx. It may come from a time when nothing in Egypt was yet written in hieroglyphs. Supporters of this theory point to Egypt's missing chapters, the huge gap in time between the end of the last ice age and the rise of the first dynasties. During this period, the Nile River shifted its course multiple times. The Sahara dramatically transitioned from wet grasslands to dry desert, and entire civilizations may have risen and fallen, completely undocumented and erased from the historical record. The idea that an ancient, pre-literate, pre-pharaonic people could have shaped a monument of this scale seems implausible to many traditional historians. But is it really? The incredible site of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey was built around 9600 BCE by people who were, by all accounts, hunter-gatherers. It features massive megalithic pillars with complex animal carvings, and it predates Stonehenge by thousands of years. Could Egypt hold a similar secret? An ancient culture that marked the land with stone long before papyrus was ever used to carry their stories. If the underwater Sphinx was built in such a time, it would change everything we think we know about human history. It would suggest not just the existence of forgotten ruins, but of a forgotten age and age that may have whispered to the builders of Giza, leaving behind more than just myth, and perhaps a monument that was drowned and then forgotten. Stone doesn't lie, it remembers. And around the site of the so-called underwater Sphinx, it tells a quiet but persistent story, not just of time, but of water. The sediment layers, the erosion marks, and the ancient flood patterns all hint at a history that began long before the desert became dry, long before the Nile settled into its familiar course, and long before the pharaohs carved their names into history. Geologists who have examined the photographs and data from the site near Abu Rawash have noted peculiar erosion marks on the exposed sections, smooth, rounded grooves that strongly suggest prolonged exposure to flowing water. Not wind, not sand, but rainfall and movement, forces that have been largely absent from this region for thousands of years. Similar arguments, of course, have been made about the Great Sphinx itself, especially its enclosure wall. Critics of the standard timeline point out that the deep, vertical fissures that are seen on the Sphinx's surrounding trench don't resemble wind erosion at all. They perfectly mimic the effects of heavy, sustained prehistoric rain. Now, at the site of the possible underwater Sphinx, we see that same signature, only this time it's hidden beneath a shallow flood basin. During periods of low Nile flow, parts of the structure are said to rise into view. Lion-like haunches, rounded shoulders, and a foundation that just seems too level and straight to be natural. Researchers who have surveyed the area have noted that the basin is geologically active, with a high clay content and clear evidence of ancient water tables that have fluctuated violently over the millennia. The stone there is heavily worn, but not randomly. The wear seems to follow the shape of the structure itself, flowing in lines that suggest it was deliberately carved and then later drowned by rising waters. Some of the sediment layers around the site have been dated back to the early Holocene period, a time when Egypt was much wetter, greener, and prone to massive catastrophic flooding. If a monument had been carved back then, it could have stood for centuries before being swallowed by mud, forgotten by shifting populations, and buried under the Nile's wandering, silty path. Skeptics argue this is all just a coincidence, a series of natural formations that have been teased into a myth by hopeful eyes. But water doesn't typically form perfect symmetry. It doesn't carve out what look like pores. And it doesn't create perfectly aligned foundations that just so happen to echo the geometry of a known Sphinx that sits just a few miles away. So the question deepens: if water erased this monument from our view, what else has it taken with it? And more urgently, how much of our own history still lies hidden just beneath the surface? If the underwater Sphinx is truly there, silent, carved and ancient, why hasn't it been excavated? Why does it remain buried beneath layers of mud and official silence, passed over by mainstream archaeologists, ignored by governments, and left to the currents of the Nile? That is the question that hangs over this entire mystery. The answer, much like the artifact itself, lies just beneath the surface. First, you have to understand that Egypt's archaeological institutions are, rightfully so, incredibly protective. The nation guards its ancient heritage with rigid protocols, strict excavation rules, and an unwavering insistence on academic consensus before breaking ground. To get permission to dig up any site, especially one that so radically challenges the traditional timeline, requires a mountain of paperwork, huge amounts of funding, international oversight, and most importantly, institutional approval. And that approval often rests on one unspoken rule. You do not get to rewrite Egypt's official history without a mountain of undeniable peer-reviewed evidence already in hand. And that's the core of the problem. The so-called underwater Sphinx has never received an official, state-sponsored excavation. Independent researchers, foreign academics, and fringe theorists have all studied the area from a distance, but without formal backing from the Egyptian government. Their findings remain anecdotal, suggestive, but ultimately inconclusive in the eyes of the establishment. There's also the immense physical challenge of the Nile itself. The river is not a static feature. It floods, it recedes, and its path shifts over the decades. The site where the monument allegedly rests is a low-lying floodplain, often completely submerged for much of the year. A proper excavation would require draining the entire area, rerouting water, protecting the nearby ecosystems, and carefully managing the potential for structural damage to an artifact that has been under immense sediment pressure for centuries. An undertaking of that scale would be a monumental effort, taking years, if not decades, to complete. Then there are the political factors. A discovery of this magnitude, if it were ever validated, would disrupt more than just academic timelines. It could fundamentally challenge established national narratives, upset a sense of national pride that is deeply tied to the dynastic pharaohs, and attract a media frenzy that Egypt might not be eager to welcome. The Ministry of Antiquities, logically, prefers to promote discoveries that reinforce Egypt's established grandeur, not ones that question its foundational history. Finally, some whisper that certain institutions may already know more than they are willing to reveal, that preliminary, non-invasive studies have been done quietly behind closed doors. But without any public records, peer-reviewed findings, or official government announcements, these claims inevitably drift into the realm of conspiracy theory. And so, the monument remains buried, whether by accident or by design. It is a strange and powerful irony that in a land so completely obsessed with preserving its ancient past, one of its greatest potential mysteries may be hidden in plain sight, unclaimed, unstudied, and untouched by time's official record. But nothing stays buried forever. To the ancient Egyptians, the Sphinx was far more than just a sculpture. It was a powerful symbol, part guardian, part god, part living mystery. With the body of a lion and the head of a man, the Sphinx represented raw physical strength fused with divine wisdom. It was the untamed power of nature, tamed and guided by the royal mind. It was a cosmic sentinel, often placed at sacred thresholds, where the world of the divine met the world of the mortal. The most famous, of course, is the Great Sphinx of Giza. Towering 66 feet high, it has guarded the plateau for what is believed to be over 4,500 years, facing the rising sun and watching eternally over the tombs of the pharaohs. Its exact origin is still debated. The mainstream view is that it was built by the pharaoh Khafra. Others, pointing to the water erosion, argue it may be far older, its face simply recarved over time. So, what would it mean if a second Sphinx, hidden, water-worn, and possibly thousands of years older, exists just a few miles away. It would change everything. There are no known records that speak of twin sphinxes at Giza. The ancient texts are silent, but in later Greco-Roman traditions, there are mentions of guardians being positioned in balance, flanking sacred spaces to create a powerful symmetry. And in Egyptian architecture, symmetry is sacred. Temples often have twin statues at their entrances, twin obelisks, and twin avenues of smaller sphinxes or lions. Why not twin great sphinxes? Some researchers argue that the so-called underwater sphinx might not be a copy, but the original A prototype, a pre-dynastic version that was later replicated on a much grander scale on the Giza Plateau. If that's true, it suggests that the very idea of the Sphinx didn't come from the dynastic pyramid builders, but from a much older, forgotten culture, whose myths were carried forward, adopted, and later refined by the pharaohs. And if this monument does indeed predate writing, then it may not be bound by the ideology of the pharaohs at all. Its original purpose could have been something entirely different, perhaps astronomical, marking a specific celestial alignment, perhaps ritualistic, or even commemorative, marking the site of a great flood, a fallen king, or a forgotten god. The lion shape itself is no accident. In ancient Egypt, lions represented the horizon, the Akka, which was the gate of both dawn and dusk. A sphinx facing east is watching the eternal rebirth of the sun. To carve one was to freeze that sacred daily act in stone. Now imagine one carved long before the pyramids, perfectly aligned, guarding a sacred spot and just waiting. It would not just rewrite history, it would redefine the entire mythos of Egypt itself, not as the beginning of high civilization, but as the last powerful echo of something even older. And the fact that this powerful symbol might be sleeping beneath the water is all the more fitting for a guardian of lost worlds. As whispers of the underwater Sphinx have echoed further across the world, a quiet but deep divide has opened up, one that runs deeper than any sediment or stone. On one side stands traditional, mainstream Egyptology, cautious, structured, and deeply rooted in academic consensus. On the other side is a growing and vocal community of independent researchers, alternative historians, and curious minds who believe that something extraordinary is being willfully overlooked. Mainstream scholars insist on hard evidence, peer-reviewed studies, clear stratigraphy, inscriptions, and verified radiocarbon dates. Their concern is not unwarranted. Egypt is filled with natural rock formations known as yardangs that have been weathered by wind and water into shapes that can strongly resemble human or animal forms. Misidentifying them can lead to a cascade of misinformation and pseudoscientific theories. Archaeology, after all, must be careful. The past is fragile. It cannot be rebuilt once it has been broken by careless hands or sensational media hype. But to others, this caution has started to look like complacency. The independent investigators, many of whom are trained scientists or engineers from outside the traditional field of Egyptology, argue that the underwater Sphinx and other similar anomalies deserve much deeper, unbiased study. They point to high-resolution satellite images that show what they claim is unnatural symmetry, to LiDAR scans that appear to detect rectangular foundations buried beneath the mud, and to those persistent erosion patterns that seem to be shaped not by chaos, but by intelligent design. They also question the political and institutional motivations behind the official silence. Tourism dollars, they point out, flow through the well-trodden, accepted monuments. A new Sphinx, especially one that so profoundly threatens the established timeline of Egyptian history, could disrupt not only Egypt's national narrative, but also its authority over its own past. The fear, they suggest, is not of a fraud, but of having to rewrite everything. Books, documentaries, podcasts, and online forums now regularly feature the underwater Sphinx. It has become a potent symbol of hidden history, used as both a rallying cry for open-minded inquiry and as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pseudoscience. Supporters call for open, transparent excavation. Detractors warn against giving oxygen to unfounded theories. The truth, as is so often the case, seems to be lost somewhere in the middle, buried beneath voices that are now almost as thick as the Nile's own silt. This divide isn't just academic, it's emotional. It speaks to the very core of how we approach the past. Do we trust only what has been officially confirmed, or do we dare to follow the tantalizing hints that have been left just beyond our reach? The underwater Sphinx forces that question right out into the open. It's not just a rock or a relic, it's a litmus test for just how curious we're allowed to be. And as long as it remains unearthed, both sides will continue to argue above a monument that says nothing, yet might just change everything. There's something deeply haunting about a mystery that is buried in plain sight, especially when it wears the face of a lion and stares up from the mud with an ancient, unbreakable silence. The so-called underwater Sphinx near Giza may or may not be real, but its pull on our collective imagination is undeniably powerful. It stirs something deep within us, a yearning not just to discover, but to remember. Because deep down, the story of a forgotten monument taps into something that is older than archaeology itself, the universal human sense of loss. We have always lived beside ruins. Cities fall, languages die, and entire civilizations vanish beneath waves, sand, and ash. We look to the past not just for answers, but for our own identity. Who were we? How far back do our stories truly stretch? And what vital parts of our own history have we forgotten in our relentless rush toward the future? If the underwater Sphinx is real, if it was truly carved by hands that existed before recorded history, it becomes more than just a relic. It becomes a voice from a chapter of the human story that we didn't even know existed. It would be a marker from an age when people may have understood the stars differently, honored the earth more intimately, or carried a mythology that we can now only guess at. Some believe it belongs to an advanced, prehistoric culture that was lost to a global catastrophe, a theory that is often dismissed as fringe speculation. But whether or not that's true, the emotional gravity of the idea remains. To imagine a monument of this scale being carved long before the pyramids, then being submerged by rising waters and completely erased from memory, is to confront just how fragile civilization truly is. And perhaps that's why the story persists with such force. It reminds us that time is not a straight line, that empires are temporary, and that even stone can disappear if the river flows for long enough. But more importantly, it reminds us that the age of discovery isn't over, that the earth still holds profound secrets that are not written in our textbooks. In an era that is increasingly defined by instant answers and global data, the underwater Sphinx is a rare and precious thing. An unanswered question, a powerful possibility, a mystery that has not yet been solved by drones or algorithms. And whether it ultimately proves to be a natural rock formation or a forgotten monument, it already holds immense value simply because it makes us wonder. It makes us wonder if the past is deeper and more complex than we thought. It makes us wonder if our myths hold distant memories of real events. And it makes us wonder what else lies just beneath the surface, waiting patiently for someone to finally listen. The underwater Sphinx of Giza, whether it was carved by ancient hands or simply shaped by accident, whether it's ever confirmed or forever dismissed, remains where it has always been. Beneath the surface, under the mud, the water, and the immense weight of time. It has no plaque, no official name, and no spotlight shining on it. And yet, it speaks softly in the profound absence of answers. For every single monument we've unearthed in Egypt, there are countless others that are still buried, still waiting. Some are too fragile to ever be uncovered. Others have been lost forever to the shifting, wandering path of the Nile, drowned beneath layers of silt and, perhaps, secrecy. And a few, like this one, may just be sitting in plain view, ignored not because they lack importance, but because they ask questions that we're not yet ready to answer. Maybe that's what makes the underwater Sphinx so incredibly powerful. It's not its potential size or its possible age. It's its silence. It forces us to confront the very limits of what we know, and to sit with the deep discomfort of what we might have overlooked as a civilization. In truth, it may never be excavated. Politics, funding, and tradition can form walls that are taller than any ancient tomb. But that doesn't mean it's irrelevant. Quite the opposite. The monument's very obscurity has turned it into a mirror, reflecting not just what lies buried in the earth, but what we, as a people, choose to remember and what we choose to forget. It also reminds us that history is not a closed book. It's a living, breathing puzzle scattered across vast landscapes and forgotten shorelines, just waiting for a shift in the tide, a change in our thinking, or a single brave question to unsettle the dust. Perhaps one day the water will recede for good, and its full form will finally rise. Pause, face, and all. Perhaps advanced radar will one day confirm what myth has long suspected. Or perhaps the mystery will remain just as it is, passed from one generation to the next like a whisper between ancient stones. But whether this monument is a man-made miracle or a mirage of nature, the underwater Sphinx already serves its greatest purpose. It stirs our imagination. And in a world that is so often drowning in certainty, that may be its greatest and most lasting gift. Because maybe the most ancient things aren't just buried in sand or in time. Maybe they're buried deep inside of us, in our innate need to explore, to remember and to believe that somewhere out there, beneath the waves or the desert, the past still breathes and still waits to be found.